talk about authentication in Power Apps portals. So let's jump into it. So the agenda, quite simple here. I'll try to keep the presentation very short, and then we jump to the demo. So I'll talk about authentication types, the invitation process, a few tips on how to customize the sign-in page. That's a very common requirement I see from people. So they do want to change the look and feel of the sign-in page. And then we'll go to the demo. So authentication. Portals provides at a high level 2 main authentication types, being local authentication and external authentication. The local authentication means a username and password stored against your contact record in your CDS environment. So I think the guys mentioned earlier, so a portal user is not the same as a system user. They are actually a contact within your CDS environment. So as you can imagine, Microsoft doesn't really want to have the password, username and password stored in the CDS. So that's a deprecated feature. And Microsoft is highly recommending people to use Azure ADB2C. So my demo will be very heavily focused on Azure ADB2C. The password's hashed, so it's not like anyone can see the password, but still it's not really ideal. For external authentication, as you can imagine, the credentials are managed by the third-party identity providers. There are a few identity providers supported by default, so Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, those ones, and OpenID protocols, so Azure Active Directory and Azure ADB2C. Just exploring a bit more on Azure ADB2C, so think of it as an identity provider as a service. So your customers, your external users can still use their social media. They can still connect through LinkedIn, Facebook. You do need to enable in Azure ADB2C, but they can still use. They don't have to use a username and password. My focus here is not to talk about licensing, but it's just to you guys also need to have it clear in mind that whenever you're using an Azure ADB2C, there is an additional license that you may have to pay. Like you see here, first 50,000 users are actually free, so it's very unlikely that you oversee that. But still, in case you do, there is a licensing to be applied there. The invitation process. So the invitation purpose is basically invite an existing contact to your portal. So let's say you are coming from a legacy system, or you just created the contact manually in your CDS, and then you want them to become a portal user. So basically that's why the invitation process exists. Just describing here a few of the main elements, but just highlighting here the most important ones. So we can send an invitation to a single contact or a group of contacts. You can also specify an expiry date. So let's say the invitation process will be sending an email to that contact. So you can define that link. It will have a link in that email, and you can specify that to expire, let's say in 2 weeks or a month time. Just a few more things here. The invitation process, the purpose of that is inviting an existing contact. So some people think it only works with local authentication, but no, you can still use, let's say you have Azure ADB2C set up in your environment. You can still use Azure ADB2C and still use the invitation process. And as there is an email that is sent out to the customer, by default, it's used the email address one field of the contact record. Sign-in page. So this is the out-of-the-box sign-in page. As you can see in the top, there's a tab control there, sign-in register and redeem invitation. And then we have here on the left a box for the sign-in with local account, and then on the right-hand side, sign in with external account. So if you add multiple external accounts here, it would just show another button with the name of that identity provider. So I see very common questions on the community forums, like people want to change the labels or play around with removing some options. And that's how I'm going to start my demo. So I'm going to jump here to my make.powerapps.com. I'm in the apps section, and I'm going to open the portal. I'll also open the portal management app. And one more thing here, I'll just open the Portal Studio. So I'll just click on the portal and click on Edit. I'm not going to make any direct customizations to the portal in here. I just want this page open just to clear cache from time to time. So I'll use the scene configuration to clear cache. So back here in my portal, I can go on sign in. And first thing I want to show is where these options are stored within your CDS. So just a quick one on the labels. So the labels, as Arpit was mentioning, pretty much every label you have in your portal, you should be using a content snippet. And that's how Microsoft has done this by default. So if I navigate to my content snippets, and just for example, I'm just going to search here for password. And for example, account sign-in password label. So basically, this is the label that's being used for the password. So I can just change this to just as an example, enter your password. Let me clear cache. And I'll just refresh the portals. Enter your password now. This label here has changed. So as you can see, it's just a few labels that you can change in your CDS. So the other options here are managed by site settings. So if I go here on my portal management app and click on site settings, you can see that we have a bunch of out-of-the-box site settings here, and they are all related to the authentication process. So if let's say we want to hide the register or redeem invitation, we have here registration enabled, that by default is true. And by simply changing this to false, clear the cache once more. And I'm just going to refresh my sign-in page. Just loading here the page. And now you see that I still have my local and external sign-in, but I no longer have an option to register. Although this might solve some people's problem, it might cause additional problem. So for example, if I try to use my Azure Active Directory account to sign in, which is basically the account that I'm logged in on my Power Apps, this will throw an error because my registration is disabled. So that's a tricky site setting that you probably want to keep it true, and perhaps hide that the tabs via JavaScript. And that's the second part of my demo. So what I'm going to do here is apply some JavaScript to this page. So basically customizing a little bit the look and feel here. Sign out. Go back to the page here. So for this part of the demo here, what I want to do is I want to create a parameter here on the query string. And what I'm going to do is I will hide the external sign-in or local sign-in based on the query string parameter. So this parameter, just for example, I'll call it local login equals 1. So if a user is coming from this URL, I want to show only local sign-in. And if they're not coming from this URL, if this value is different, or even if there's nothing here, I want to display only external login. So this way you could, let's say, keep your local sign-in only for internal users, and only certain users would have that URL. and those kind of things. So it's just to play around a little bit with this page. Now back in my portal management app, if I navigate to web pages, you're gonna see that I don't have a sign-in page here. And the reason for that is because that's a protected web page and you can't make direct customizations on that web page. But what not everybody knows is that behind this web page here, there is a content snippet that is being loaded. And this content snippet exists in your environment by default. I'm gonna search here. So I don't have the content snippet, but I can always create it manually. The content snippet name is account/signin/copy. So this is gonna load in the sign-in page. Go back here, I'll just define my website. Type is HTML. And let me go here on the HTML tab. So I'll start writing very simple code here. So I'll just call a method, call a function here called hide. Let's say and what I want to do is I want to validate the value in my query string, and then I want to hide either the external or the local authentication option. So first, I need to get my URL parameters. Use this native JavaScript function, which basically retrieves my parameters. So here, location search. And now I can use the get method to get my parameter itself. So this equals URL params dot get. I need to specify the name of my parameter, which is local login. So first, let's make sure it's not undefined. So we have a value there. If my local login equals 1. So what we want to do here is hide let's just put a comment, hide external login. Otherwise, we want to hide local login. Okay, that's the first part of my JavaScript. Now we need to know how to hide the external login. So just a quick tip. Now, when we're talking about client-side customizations, there are tons of ways to achieve the same result. So I'll just quickly show one here. So I'm going to inspect this element. And while I'm inspecting, you can see that I want to hide this entire section here, either this div or this field set. And we can see that we have an ID here. And whenever we are trying to do client-side customization, we would prefer, if possible, to use the ID of the elements. So just copy this ID here. And what I need is to hide the parent. Otherwise, it will just hide the H4 element. And here I'll say get my ID parent. If I do this, I'm going to save clear cache. And push the page. Let's see if this works. Not on the first go. Let's miss. Just clear the cache again. Okay, something wrong in my code, maybe.
I think you might have a dot in before the external.
Before the oh, sorry, yeah, sorry. The dot I would be using if I was calling a class, but this is an ID, so I can just use the hash. Thanks for that. I think it was David. Well, I'll just copy. I have a code here on the side. I'll just copy and paste. So basically what I'm doing here, so there's probably some dot here or there missing. So what I'm doing here is hiding my external login heading. And then as a default condition, I'm also hiding the local login, and I'm hiding the navigation tabs as well. So there the cache. Oh, there you go. When I have the local login equals 1, I'm only displaying the local sign-in. And if I don't have anything on the URL, I'm displaying only the external sign-in. Now, you would probably want to centralize and play a little bit here with CSS. Just for example, I think the main point here was show that you can customize this web page. I can get rid of this content snippet here. Now, let me show you guys a little bit around the invitation process. So back here in my model-driven app, I'm going to create a new contact record. I'm going to create this manually, just for example. So let me just go to the contact form. And here, I'll just call it 365 Saturday 01. Email doesn't really matter, so I'll just put 365. Okay, so now let's say we have a contact record here, and I want to invite this contact to my portal. I could go here directly in invitations and create an invitation from scratch, but there is a shortcut here on the ribbon. You see here the create invitation. So I'm going to click on this button, and this is going to redirect me to the new invitation. And there's already a few information here populated. So you see that we can define an expiry date. I'll leave it blank. We can define if it's a single or a group that we are inviting. We can trigger a workflow once the contact is redeemed. I'll keep it default, everything for now. And here on Advanced tab, there's a huge code that it has generated automatically. You could manually define a process, an internal process, and put here an internal ID or something that you want. If you keep it blank, it will generate this huge code here, which is fine for the example. Now, in the invitation record, I'm going to trigger a workflow. This workflow is called Send Invitation. It's an out-of-the-box workflow from the portals solution, and I have it here open on another tab. By default, this is a background workflow. I just changed it to a real-time workflow just to make it faster here on the demo. And I also changed the content of the email that it generates. So you can personalize this here according to your branding and enter put your logo or whatever. And also you need to change the URL. So I'm putting here my portal's URL. And if I go back here on the invitation, I should now have an email associated to this record. You have been invited to our portal. Click here to redeem your invitation. So once I click, I'm redirected to the portals, and I already have my invitation code here. So I click register. You can see here that it is associating it retrieved the invitation code, and it found my contact. I'll just copy this. Click on register. Oh, there you go. I'm logged into the portals now, and the portals didn't create a different contact or anything. It just associated my existing contact with this portal user. So they're basically the same record. Okay, let me just see. I'm not seeing the questions here. Okay, it was just the comments on the JavaScript. Okay, I will do some stuff now on Azure. So I'm gonna navigate to my portal, azure.com. And I'll talk a little bit about Azure ADB2C. Now here I already set up my Azure ADB2C tenant. And I already set up that because it is very simple, but there is a lot of clicks, there is a lot of steps to follow. And Nick Dolman wrote a great article on this. So if you do need to set up Azure ADB2C, I would recommend you following Nick Dolman's article. It's very good. Thanks for that, Nick, if you're listening. So I already have this pre-set up, so my Azure tenant. What I need now is to create a user flow and then register my application. So first, let's create the user flow. So here in my Azure ADB2C, I'm navigating to user flows, and I'll create a new user flow. My new user flow is for sign up and sign in. Command it, okay. My name here, I can just put sign up. Identity provider is just email for now that I have. And I need to define the claims here. Okay, my user flow is created. I do need to make just a few changes. So on properties, I do need to change the token compatibility settings. Basically, I need to define the trust framework policy here, which is the TFP. In here, that's all I need. And back here in user attributes, application claims, I need to just select email address just to pass between the portals and Azure ADB2C. Okay. If I click on Run User Flow, there's a link here that it will open my configuration for my user flow. And this URL, the issuer URL, basically I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna copy and save into a notepad, because we're gonna need this when we are setting up the Azure ADB2C in the portals. So I'll just keep here. I can close this. Back in my Azure ADB2C, what I need now is to create an application. So basically, an application is the reference of my portal website. So I'll create a new application. I'm gonna call this 365 Oliver Rodrigues. And here on redirect URL, there's a default URL, so which is basically /sign-in Azure ADB2C 1. Okay, my application is registered now. Let me just see. I think there's might be one thing here to change. Yeah, I need to enable implicit grant to make it work in the portals. So just select those options there. And the application ID or client ID, this will also be used in the portals configurations. So save this here. Okay, in terms of Azure ADB2C, I know I already had a tenant created, but that's it. That's all the configuration I need to do. So now I'll just jump back to my and I think what Ambesh was mentioning about the previous the features in preview for the portals. As you can see, if we click here and I click on settings, I have two options. administration and site settings. But if I navigate to make.preview.powerapps.com, and I'm going to the same place, so apps, selecting my portal and just click on settings, we have one extra option, which is authentication settings. I'll go ahead and click on it. So to navigate to the make.preview.powerapps.com, you don't need to enable early upgrade or any other feature. This is available to everyone. Another option, I could just manually go on site settings and create my site settings for Azure ADB2C, but I just want to use here the preview feature. So this is Microsoft trying to make this experience a bit more smooth. So I'll click on Azure ADB2C. Provider name, I'll keep Azure ADB2C here. Next. So now you see that it's asking the authority, and if I click here, it's gonna say that it's the issuer URL that we saved on the notepad. So let me copy client ID, which is my application ID. So let me ID, save it. We didn't create a password reset user flow, so I'll keep this blank, and I'll also keep the additional settings blank, the default values for now. Confirm and close. Now, if I go back on my portal management app, you see that we have 36 site settings previously, and if I just refresh this, I have 53 records now. This is because the portal in the background created a bunch of site settings that are related to my Azure ADB2C. So we don't need anymore to know these values, to enter these values manually. We can just use the wizard to set up a new identity provider. Now, if I go back to my portals and just refresh the sign-in page, just taking a while here to load. Okay, so now you see that we have an extra option, which is Azure ADB2C. If I click on it, now I was redirected to Azure ADB2C, so I'm no longer in my portals. I'm going to click on sign up now. And now I'm going to specify an email address. So this Azure will actually send an email for confirmation. So I'll just create a new email here. Just create an email. Started 02. Okay, so I received my verification code here. I'll just copy here and perfect. Create. So now Azure ADB2C is creating a user in my Azure Active Directory and is going to redirect me to the portals. You can see that I already have here first name and last name that I just created on Azure. And if I navigate here in my model-driven app to the contacts records, so you see that I have the 365 Saturday 02. And then if I go here on Azure and I navigate to users, you see here that I have my 365 Saturday 02. And how the portals know to each Azure ADB2C user that they are related by this object ID here. So this object ID in from Azure user, so 937, and I go back here to my CDS. I'll just navigate to a different form. Go to Web Authentication tab. We have here the 937 DA. So this is basically the Azure user. There's also an external identity here with more information on that user within Azure. So that's how they are related. So one more thing I'd like to show is creating a custom attribute in Azure. So basically here in my CDS, I have a custom attribute. It's just a simple string field. It was just for testing purpose. And I want to create this in Azure now. I'll just go back here, Azure AD2C, click on user attributes, and I'll create a new one. So just call this 365 custom attribute. Oh, I can't start with 365. So Saturday custom attribute. Okay, Saturday custom attribute. Now I have this attribute here, but I also need to add it to my user flows. So navigate here to user flows, click on sign up, sign in user flow. On user attribute, I need to select it. And on application claims, I also need to select this field. So I need to select a user attribute to make sure it's going to come up when the user is signing up. And on application claims to make sure that this will be sending to my portals. So if just, for example, I click on run user flow and I can here simulate using this button here. If I click on sign up now, you can see that I have the field now, Saturday custom attribute. And also here in my configuration, I can see here in the claims supported that I have a new field here, new attribute. Extension is basically the prefix that Azure adds whenever you are adding a new custom attribute there. So that's how it knows it's a custom field. Okay, now I need to tell the portal that we have a mapping. That we need to define a mapping in the portal so they can know, so the portal can know which custom attribute from the CDS maps to this field, to this claims here. So for this, once more, I'm coming here to the identity provider. Guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so here on Azure ADB2C, I'll click again on it, and I'll click on additional settings. Now you see that we have a registration claims mapping, and in this option here, it's telling us already the format that it wants to add this value. So basically, attribute from my CDS equals which claim, and you can split by comma here the different claims, the different mapping. So back here in my profile, I just want to get the name of this field. So just inspect this element. So this attribute equals my claim, which is extension Saturday custom attribute. Oh, there you go, save. So once more, if I go to my site settings, you see that there is another site setting there. Again, I could have created this manually here. I just wanted to show on the preview feature. So registration claims mapping, so my attributes from CDS and my claims. Let me just clear configuration. I can sign out from this user here. Sign back in. I'll create a new user again. So let me just generate a new email here. you see that we have the new attribute. I'll just put sample value. It doesn't really matter here. Okay, we have the code. I'm just going to verify my email. Once I create this, now I should be redirected to my portal profile web page, and my custom attribute should have my sample value there. Now, there you go, custom attribute. Just one last thing I wanted to show you guys. So you're probably thinking that this page here doesn't really match your branding or your portal or your client branding in general. So I'll just show a quick tip on how to add branding to the Azure ADB2C. So back here in Azure, let me go to Azure ADB2C. You see there's an option, company branding. So once I click on it, there is a default one. And I'll just do something very simple here. I'll just add a background image and a logo. So let me save. Let's see if it comes up now. It's probably cache. Let me open an in-private session. Sign in. Oh, it's still not coming up. Try once more. So now, there you go. You see, very simply, we can change the background and change the logo, add a few more information here, just to give a better UI for your customer. There is another way to customize this page, which is basically you define your web page, your custom web page, and Microsoft, the Azure, basically injects these fields into your page. I've never done that. Not sure if it's much more complex or not, but this is a very, very quick way for you to customize this web page here, and very, very easy. You see, it's literally just uploading a couple of images there, and that's it. Guys, I actually haven't been looking at the questions. That was a demo that I wanted to show. I'm not sure if you guys have any questions. Is the branding the same that affects Forms Pro forms? I'm not sure, David. I've done only a few basic stuff on Forms Pro, so I don't have the answer for that one. Is it possible to add CSS? Yes, it is possible to add CSS. Like I said, like Microsoft can, the other option of login is you provide your page and Microsoft injects the sign-in fields. So you can have whatever CSS you want there. Is there a way to apply single sign-on? Yes, when you're using Azure ADB2C, if you have the other, so basically when using Azure ADB2C, let me just go back here. I'm going to my applications. So basically, let's say you had another company website or anything else, you would have one application registration for each of your applications, and they would all be sharing the same user flow. Okay, so that's how you can provide a single sign-on experience. So yes.
We have one more question, Oliver, asking by Kundan. Can we set a password criteria like password not equal to last 12 password using Azure BTC? Is it possible?
Yes, by default, there is already a definition, I think is one capital. The answer is yes. I'm just trying to remember where that is. I think it's probably on user flow. Your properties. So here, password complexity. So on my user flow, you can define here, you can define a custom one. I'll just keep the default. Where does password get stored? So again, if you're talking about local authentication, it is stored in the contact record in a hashed field. Let's see if it opens here. If it's Azure, it's managed by Azure. So we don't need to worry. It's
one thing I would like to add everyone here is, the local authentication is not the recommended way as suggested by the Microsoft. So Microsoft always recommend to use Azure AD2C as a default, login or the authentication option on the portal. So if you are planning to use local authentication, or if you are dealing with any client requirements, so don't recommend local authentication as a default authentication mechanism, because it's it's already deprecated by the Microsoft, and always go with the Azure AD2C authentication as a default authentication.
exactly like if you're just doing demos, like I think it's fine to use local authentication. But if you are actually doing an implementation for your customer, do go for Azure ADB2C. Like I said, it's a bit annoying the first time you set it up, but once you do it, like it's super straightforward. Just the advanced defined is taking a while here.
We have one more question asking by Emad. How can you rebrand the email to company branding? So I think you already did that, I guess.
Yeah, I was rebranding the page itself.
Yeah.
But I think it's still here in the company branding. I can't remember now. I can double check that for you, and I'll reply on the comments after.
Sure. What about migrating users from local authentication to Azure B2C?
In Azure ADB2C, you also have the feature to invite users. Where is that? I think it's here.
I think it's a great question. I guess there are a lot of folks who when the local authentication was supported, so there might be the possibility that there are a lot of portal users are using local authentication in their real-time implementation. But now the Microsoft has deprecated it, and now they have to shift on to the Azure AD B2C. So how they can plan to shift or migrate their user from local authentication or from the contact record to the Azure AD B2C?
Yeah, so as they are already a contact, you can always send an invite for them with instructions for them to sign in via Azure ADB2C, and that will associate their account. So they will still be the same contact record, but now they will be logged in as Azure
I
ADB2C.
think I would like to also add in this, like if you have to migrate all these users, so there are two ways. I've already shared my articles, so if the user, so I think Oliver has already presented for new user registration, when the user will click on the Azure AD B2C, they will click on they will register themselves, and then the new user gets created in the Azure AD B2C directory. But what happens if the contact is already there in the CRM? So in that case, you have to send the invite so that you can link the existing contact from the portal. So in case if you have to migrate your local authentication users to the Azure AD B2C, you need to create all these users available in the contact in your Azure AD B2C. So there is one option you can do it if you have less number of contacts available of the users, then you can do it manually as well. And the second option, you can write a PowerShell script as well. And for that you need to keep a temporary password for all the users. So that PowerShell script will create all that dynamic 365 existing contact record in the Azure AD B2C with a default username as the email ID, and the password will be any temporary password that they can simply change it once they log in onto the portal. So that is the one way. And the second way, I have already shared my article where I have demonstrated that how you can create the guest user in the Azure AD B2C using C# or the low-code no-code solution using Power Automate. So there might be also the possibility when you have to individually open the contact record in the CRM and send the invite or add that user in the Azure AD B2C. So what you can do is you can simply create a flag or the button or any of the trigger point in the dynamics, and as soon as you will click on the button or any boolean field, you check it in the dynamic CRM contact record, you can trigger a Power Automate, and that Power Automate will call a Microsoft Graph API, and Microsoft Graph API will add the guest user in the Azure AD B2C. So you can have a look my blog. I have posted couple of blog plug and play solution, and on my GitHub repository I have provided the Power Automate solution which called the Microsoft Graph API and add the guest user in Azure AD B2C. So this solution might help you to automate the process. So this is the way you can achieve this.
Yeah, so just a few more questions there that happened. So how can you set up other external providers, right? So in Azure ADB2C, you can go on identity provider and set up here Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever you want. And then you just need to enable as well in the user flow. Then it would come up here as well, Facebook, just to enable. So yeah, but you would also need like a developer account on Facebook, Twitter, whatever you're setting up, just to link it to your Azure ADB2C. But it should be straightforward. And then in case you guys are just curious, so we have fields here in the contact record for the username and password. So like I said, if you have an external user, your username will be an object ID on your external identity provider, and password is always blank. If it is a local account, you have here the password in a hash format. But like Arpit said, like this is deprecated, and we are highly recommending everybody to use Azure ADB2C.
Yep.
Is there a reason why you would enable Azure ADB2C for non-production portals? You can enable Azure ADB2C for non-production portals. It is actually also recommended. What I would recommend is in your Azure ADB2C, you create, you might still want to use the same tenant, and that's fine, but do create two user flows. So one user flow, a production one, and another user flow for non-production environments. And then you just register your applications there. Or I think it's probably better to have two different tenants, but I think you can still use just one. It's up to you.
Yeah, Kundan is asking, can we send automated password expiry notification via the email from Azure AD B2C?
Probably via PowerShell script or some other way. It wouldn't be coming through the portals or CDS.
I don't think any out-of-box way available in the Azure AD B2C which actually track the password expiration date. So I think I'm not sure actually. There might be.
Yeah, we can take a look at that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it is not possible, then you may might need to write some custom logic. So when the user is registered, then you can capture the registration date, and maybe in the CDS using Power Automate or workflow, you can write a logic to calculate the number of days where you want to send the notification to the user of the password expiration email. So that is the way if it is not available out of box. Emad is asking, how do you allow user to remove their linked external identity to their account?
I'm not sure I've done that. I think there's an option in the profile page to disassociate, but I haven't done that, so I'm just not entirely sure. Let's see if I can do a quick one here. I'll just check if there is an option to disassociate. I think there is. Can we set up an identity provider directly on the portal? Yes, we can. So manage external authentication here. Sorry, I'm trying to do too much here at once. So yeah, we can set up an identity provider directly on the portal, and you can see here on authentication settings, we can set up directly Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, whatever you want. Again, it's just not the recommendation from Microsoft, but you can. That's not a problem. At least technically speaking, there's no problem.
And as far as I know, Oliver, if you use the external identity on the portal directly, I think it doesn't support the SharePoint integration, as far as I know. So I think if you need to have the SharePoint integration or the document upload functionality, you need to have the external identity enabled in the Azure AD2C.
Okay,
so
yeah, I didn't know that one.
Yeah, there might be the business case where you need to have the SharePoint integration. So I think that need to check, because as far as I know, the external identity doesn't support the SharePoint integration. You need to have the Azure ADB2C for that.
So regarding the disassociation, Oliver, you can disassociate the page from where you open. So if you have already associated account, then you have an option there or the button to disassociate.
Yeah, so if I was here in the manage external authentication.
Yeah, exactly. At this place only.
But yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, no here, but you always have to have associated with at least one provider. So
exactly.
So you see that if I just remove one, no, I can't disassociate with this one because I need at least one identity provider. So hope that answers Ahmad's question.
Yeah, so I think we have covered all the questions, and one thing I would like to add here is, as far as the external identity is concerned, the portal out of box supports Azure AD, Azure AD2C, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but I think somewhere it's mentioned on the portal site, currently the Yahoo authentication is not yet supported. That was supported in the Dynamics portal, I guess, but it is not yet supported in the portal. So just keep in mind, if you have a requirement of Yahoo integration, then it is not yet supported. Maybe in the future release it's going to be supported, but right now it's not supported.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's no other questions. Again,
Excellent.
Thanks for everyone attending, and thank you, Arpit, for organizing this. Please fill out the survey, guys. It's just a few seconds, and it's really helpful for us. So if you have some time, please fill out the survey there. And thanks very much.